The rain poured down on the streets of Manhattan like tears from heaven, each droplet carrying the weight of broken dreams and forgotten promises. Maya Johnson pressed herself against the cold brick wall of the luxury hotel, her worn black uniform soaked through to her skin. The expensive fabric of her maid's dress clung to her thin frame, a cruel reminder of the life she served but could never truly be part of. At 26, Maya had learned that life rarely offered second chances to girls like her. Born in the poorest part of Brooklyn to a mother who cleaned offices at night and a father who had disappeared before her second birthday, she understood that survival meant accepting whatever scraps the world threw her way. The job at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel was supposed to be her saving grace, a steady paycheck that would help her care for her ailing mother and, maybe, just maybe, save enough to finish the nursing degree she had abandoned 3 years ago. But, tonight, everything had gone wrong. The evening had started like any other. Maya had been assigned to the penthouse suite on the 42nd floor, where some wealthy businessman was hosting a private dinner party. She had spent hours ensuring every detail was perfect, from the crystal glasses that sparkled under the chandelier to the white roses arranged in precise formations on the mahogany table. The guests had arrived in their designer clothes and diamond jewelry, speaking in hushed tones about stock prices and real estate investments while Maya moved invisibly among them, refilling champagne glasses and clearing plates. She had been careful, so careful. But accidents happen, especially when you're working your third double shift in a row because the rent is due and your mother's medication costs more than most people's car payments. The red wine had splashed across Mrs. Whitmore's white designer dress like a crimson accusation, and the woman's scream had cut through the dinner conversation like a knife through silk. "You clumsy girl!" Mrs. Whitmore had shrieked, her face twisted with rage. "This dress costs more than you make in a year. You've ruined everything." The hotel manager, Mr. Peterson, had appeared within minutes, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger. Maya had tried to explain, tried to apologize, but the words had fallen on deaf ears. Mrs. Whitmore was the wife of a major investor in the hotel chain, and her displeasure was not something the management could afford. "You're terminated, effective immediately," Peterson had announced in front of all the guests, his voice cold and final. "Security will escort you out." Maya had felt the world tilt beneath her feet. The job wasn't just income, it was her lifeline. Without it, she couldn't pay for her mother's chemotherapy treatments. Without it, they would lose their small apartment in Queens. Without it, she had nothing. Now she stood in the rain outside the hotel service entrance, her few belongings stuffed into a torn paper bag that was slowly disintegrating in the downpour. The security guard had taken her employee ID and keycard, but he had at least had the decency to look ashamed as he locked the door behind her. Maya had nowhere to go, no money for a taxi, and the last subway train had already departed. Her phone had died hours ago, its cracked screen finally giving up after months of barely functioning. Even if it had been working, who would she call? Her mother was too sick to help, and Maya had lost touch with most of her friends when she started working double shifts to make ends meet. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford, but desperation was becoming her closest companion. The sound of expensive shoes clicking against wet pavement made her look up. A man was walking toward the hotel's main entrance, his perfectly tailored black suit somehow managing to repel the rain as if the weather itself respected his authority. Even in the dim light of the street lamps, Maya could see that everything about him screamed wealth and power. His watch probably cost more than she had ever seen in her life, and his confidence was the kind that only came from never having to worry about where the next meal would come from. As he approached the golden doors of the hotel, the man paused and glanced in her direction. Their eyes met for a moment across the rain-soaked street, and Maya felt something she couldn't quite identify pass between them. It wasn't pity, which she had seen too much of in her life. It wasn't disgust, which she had expected. It was something deeper, more complex, like recognition of a kindred spirit in the most unlikely of places. The man was tall, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair that was perfectly styled despite the rain. His skin had the healthy glow that came from expensive skincare products and regular vacations in exotic locations. But it was his eyes that caught Maya's attention. They were dark brown, almost black in the streetlight, and they held a depth of understanding that seemed impossible for someone who had clearly never known hardship. He hesitated at the hotel entrance, his hand on the brass handle, and looked back at her again. Maya quickly looked away, embarrassed by her bedraggled appearance, and the tears that she hadn't realized were mixing with the rainwater on her cheeks. She didn't want his pity, didn't want to be another sad story for him to forget by morning. But, instead of entering the hotel, the man changed direction and walked toward her. Maya's heart began to race, not from fear exactly, but from the overwhelming uncertainty of what this encounter might bring. Men like him didn't typically acknowledge the existence of women like her, let alone approach them on dark, rainy streets. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice carrying a warmth that contradicted the cold night air. His accent was refined, educated, but there was something genuine in his tone that surprised her. Maya tried to speak but found that the words were stuck in her throat. She was too exhausted, too overwhelmed, too defeated to maintain the strong facade she usually wore like armor. Instead, she just shook her head slightly, unable to trust herself to speak without breaking down completely. The man stepped closer, and Maya caught a hint of his cologne, something expensive and subtle that reminded her of cedar and rain-washed earth. He seemed to take in her uniform, her tear-stained face, and the soggy bag of belongings she clutched against her chest. "I'm Alexander Hayes," he said simply, as if the name should mean something to her. When she didn't respond, he continued, "I couldn't help but notice you standing here in the rain. Do you need help getting somewhere?" Maya finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "I don't have anywhere to go." The admission hung between them like a confession, heavy with implications she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Alexander's expression shifted, and she saw something that might have been understanding cross his features. "Everyone has somewhere to go," he said gently. "Maybe you just haven't remembered where yet." There was something about the way he said it that made Maya look up at him more carefully. This wasn't the kind of empty platitude that wealthy people usually offered to make themselves feel better about the world's inequalities. There was weight behind his words, as if he had personal experience with the concept of having nowhere to turn. "I just lost my job," Maya found herself saying, though she couldn't understand why she was confiding in a complete stranger. "I can't afford a taxi, and the subway has stopped running. I don't even have money for a phone call." Alexander was quiet for a moment, and Maya could see him processing this information. She expected him to make some polite excuse and disappear into the warmth and luxury of the hotel lobby. Instead, he surprised her again. "Where do you live?" he asked. "Queens," Maya replied automatically, then immediately regretted sharing even that small detail. She didn't know this man, didn't know what his intentions might be. Her mother had always warned her about trusting strangers, especially men who seemed too good to be true. But there was something in Alexander's demeanor that put her at ease despite her natural caution. He had the kind of presence that commanded respect without demanding it, and his attention felt genuine rather than predatory. "Queens is a long way from here," he observed. "Especially on a night like this." Maya nodded, not trusting herself to speak again. The weight of her situation was beginning to settle on her shoulders like a lead blanket. She had no money, no transportation, and nowhere to go. The hotel security guard had made it clear that she couldn't loiter on the property, and the police would probably move her along if she tried to wait out the storm in a public space. "I have a car," Alexander said, his voice careful and measured. "I could give you a ride home." The offer hung in the air between them, loaded with possibilities both dangerous and hopeful. Maya's rational mind screamed warnings about accepting rides from strangers, especially wealthy men who appeared out of nowhere offering help. But her practical side recognized that she had few alternatives, and something about Alexander's manner suggested that his offer came from genuine concern rather than ulterior motives. "I don't know you," she said finally, her voice stronger now despite the tremor of uncertainty that ran through it. "No," Alexander agreed, "you don't. But I'm offering you a safe ride home, nothing more. You can check my identification if it would make you feel better." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather wallet, extracting what appeared to be a driver's license and holding it out to her. Maya hesitated, then took the card, squinting at it in the dim streetlight. The name matched what he had told her, Alexander James Hayes. The address was in the most expensive part of Manhattan, and the photograph showed the same kind face that was now watching her with patient concern. Maya handed the license back to him, her mind racing through her options. She could refuse and try to find another way home, though she had no idea what that might be. She could accept and risk the unknown dangers that might come with getting into a stranger's car. Or she could stand here in the rain until morning, getting soaked and probably sick, with no guarantee that her situation would improve. "All right," she heard herself saying, the words coming out before her rational mind could stop them. "Thank you." Alexander's face brightened with what appeared to be genuine relief, as if her acceptance of his help mattered to him on a personal level. He gestured toward the street where a sleek black sedan was parked at the curb, its polished surface reflecting the streetlights like a dark mirror. As they walked toward the car, Maya couldn't help but notice that this wasn't just any expensive vehicle. It was the kind of car that probably cost more than most people's houses, with lines so elegant they seemed to flow like liquid metal. The interior, when Alexander opened the passenger door for her, was all leather and wood grain, with controls that looked more like something from a spaceship than an automobile. "This is your car?" Maya asked, unable to keep the amazement out of her voice. Alexander paused in the act of settling into the driver's seat. "Yes," he said simply, but something in his tone suggested there was more to the story. As he started the engine, which purred to life with barely a whisper of sound, Maya found herself studying his profile in the dim light from the dashboard. There was something familiar about him, something that nagged at the edge of her consciousness like a half-remembered dream. She had the strangest feeling that she should recognize him, but she couldn't place where they might have met before. The car pulled away from the curb with smooth precision, and Maya sank back into the leather seat, finally, allowing herself to relax for the first time in hours. The interior was warm and dry, a sharp contrast to the cold rain that was still pelting the windows. She could feel some of the tension leaving her shoulders as they navigated through the relatively empty streets of late-night Manhattan. "So," Alexander said, his voice breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them, "what kind of work were you doing at the hotel?" Maya hesitated, then decided there was no point in being evasive. "Housekeeping," she said. "I was assigned to the penthouse suites. It was good work, steady pay." Her voice caught slightly on the past tense. "Was?" Alexander prompted gently. "I had an accident tonight," Maya explained, the memory still fresh and painful. "Spilled wine on a guest's dress. She complained to management, and they fired me on the spot." She could see Alexander's hands tighten slightly on the steering wheel, though his voice remained neutral. "That seems harsh for an accident." "The guest was someone important," Maya said with a bitter laugh. "The wife of a major investor. My manager couldn't afford to upset her, so I became expendable." "I'm sorry," Alexander said, and the sincerity in his voice made Maya look at him more closely. "That's not right." There was an edge to his words that suggested he felt personally offended by her treatment, which struck Maya as odd. Most people would offer polite sympathy and move on, but Alexander seemed genuinely angry on her behalf. They drove in silence for a while, the city lights streaming past the windows like fallen stars. Maya found herself relaxing despite the strangeness of the situation. There was something calming about Alexander's presence, something that made her feel safer than she had in a long time. He drove with the same quiet confidence with which he carried himself, navigating the streets with practiced ease. "What will you do now?" he asked as they crossed the bridge into Queens. It was the question Maya had been trying not to think about all evening. "I don't know," she admitted. "I need to find another job quickly. My mother is sick, and she depends on me for her medical bills." She hadn't meant to share that much personal information, but something about the darkness of the car and the strangeness of the night made it easier to be honest. Alexander didn't respond immediately, but she could sense him processing what she had said. "What kind of illness?" he asked quietly. "Cancer," Maya said, the word falling heavy in the space between them. "She's been fighting it for 2 years. The treatments are expensive, and insurance only covers so much." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, and Maya wondered if she had shared too much. But when he spoke again, his voice was gentle and understanding. "My father died of cancer when I was 15, he said simply. I know how hard it can be to watch someone you love go through that. The admission hung in the air between them, creating an unexpected bond of shared experience. Maya found herself looking at Alexander with new eyes, seeing past the expensive clothes and obvious wealth to the person underneath who had also known loss and pain. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "It was a long time ago," Alexander replied, but Maya could hear the echo of old grief in his voice. "But it changed everything for my family. Made me understand how quickly life can shift, how important it is to take care of the people we love." They had entered Queens now, and Maya began giving him directions to her neighborhood. As they drove deeper into the working-class area where she lived, she couldn't help but notice the contrast between this part of the city and the gleaming towers of Manhattan they had left behind. The buildings here were older, more worn, with fire escapes clinging to their sides like metal ivy. The streets were narrower, lined with small shops that had been serving the same families for generations. Alexander navigated the turns without comment, his expensive car looking oddly out of place among the modest homes and corner bodegas. Maya wondered what he thought of her neighborhood, whether he was judging her for the circumstances that had brought her here. But, when she glanced at his face, she saw only concentration and what might have been respect for the resilience required to make a life in this part of the city. "Turn left at the next corner," Maya directed, her heart beginning to race as they approached her building. She wasn't sure what would happen when they arrived, whether this strange interlude would simply end with polite goodbyes or if there might be something more to come. The building where she lived with her mother was a 6-story walk-up that had seen better decades. The brick facade was stained with age and weather, and the small front yard was more dirt than grass. But it was home, and Maya felt a surge of protective affection for the place that had sheltered her family through good times and bad. Alexander pulled up to the curb and put the car in park, but he didn't immediately get out or make any move to end their encounter. Instead, he sat quietly for a moment, his hands still on the steering wheel, as if he was wrestling with some internal decision. "Maya," he said finally, turning to face her fully for the first time since they had gotten into the car. In the glow of the streetlight, she could see that his expression was serious, almost troubled. "Can I ask you something?" She nodded, curious about what could be causing the uncertainty she heard in his voice. "Do you believe in second chances?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. It was philosophical, unexpected, and seemed to carry more weight than a simple query. Maya considered her answer carefully, thinking about her own life and the opportunities that had slipped through her fingers despite her best efforts. "I want to," she said honestly. "But I've learned that most second chances have to be created, not given." Alexander smiled at that, the expression transforming his entire face and making him look younger, less burdened by whatever responsibilities rested on his shoulders. "That's a wise way to look at it," he said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, holding it out to her. Maya took it, noting the expensive paper and elegant design. The name Alexander Hayes was printed in simple black letters, along with a phone number and what appeared to be a corporate address in Manhattan. "If you need help finding work," he said, "call me. I know people in the hospitality industry. I might be able to make some connections for you." Maya looked at the card, then back at Alexander's face. There was something he wasn't telling her, some piece of information that would make sense of this entire strange encounter. But she could also see that he wasn't ready to share whatever it was, and she was too grateful for his kindness to push for explanations. "Thank you," she said, tucking the card into her uniform pocket. "For everything. The ride, the offer to help. You didn't have to do any of this." "Maybe not," Alexander agreed. "But sometimes we do things not because we have to, but because we can. Because it's right." Maya opened the car door and stepped out into the night air, which felt almost warm compared to the earlier rain. She leaned down to look at Alexander through the passenger window, trying to memorize his face and the kindness she had found in the most unexpected place. "Good night, Alexander," she said. "Good night, Maya," he replied. "And, remember, call me if you need that help." As she walked toward her building, Maya could hear the soft purr of the expensive car's engine behind her. She paused at the front door and looked back, watching as Alexander's sedan pulled away from the curb and disappeared into the night. Only then did she realize that she felt different somehow, as if the encounter had changed something fundamental about her understanding of the world and her place in it. The building's front door creaked as she opened it, and Maya began the familiar climb to the third floor where she and her mother shared a small two-bedroom apartment. Each step echoed in the narrow stairwell, and she found herself thinking about the strange turn her evening had taken. Just hours ago, she had been facing complete disaster, with no job, no prospects, and no way to get home. Now she had a business card in her pocket and the memory of genuine kindness from someone who had no obligation to care about her problems. As she reached her floor, Maya could see light seeping out from under their apartment door, which meant her mother was still awake despite the late hour. She paused for a moment, gathering her courage to face the conversation that awaited her. She would have to explain about losing the job, about the uncertain future that now stretched before them both. But, for the first time in hours, she felt like she might have some hope to offer along with the bad news. The business card crinkled slightly as she shifted her weight, and Maya found herself wondering about Alexander Hayes and the second chances he had asked her about. She had told him that most opportunities had to be created rather than given, but maybe, just maybe, some were offered by strangers on rainy nights who understood that everyone deserved a chance to rebuild their life. Maya took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and opened the door to face whatever came next, carrying with her the unexpected gift of possibility that had emerged from the worst night of her life. The soft click of the apartment door closing behind her echoed through the small hallway like a whisper of finality. Maya stood for a moment in the familiar darkness, letting her eyes adjust to the dim light that filtered through the living room from her mother's bedroom. The scent of chamomile tea and the faint medicinal smell that had become part of their daily life greeted her like an old friend, both comforting and heartbreaking in its familiarity. "Maya? Is that you, sweetheart?" Her mother's voice drifted from the bedroom, weak but alert. Even through the exhaustion that the chemotherapy brought, Dorothy Johnson had the uncanny ability to sense when something was wrong with her daughter. "Yes, Mama," Maya called softly, hanging her wet uniform jacket on the hook by the door. She could feel the business card crinkle in the pocket, a reminder of the evening's unexpected encounter. "I'm home." She made her way through their modest living room, past the worn sofa that had served as both seating and her bed for the past 6 months, since they had converted her old room into a more comfortable space for her mother's recovery. The coffee table was cluttered with prescription bottles, medical appointment cards, and a half-finished crossword puzzle that had become Dorothy's way of keeping her mind sharp during the long hours of treatment recovery. Dorothy was propped up in bed, her reading glasses perched on her nose, a mystery novel open in her lap. At 58, she had been a vibrant woman who worked as a seamstress for a local alterations shop, known for her quick wit and infectious laugh. The illness had stolen some of her physical strength, but her spirit remained unbroken, and her love for her daughter burned as fiercely as ever. "You're later than usual," Dorothy observed, setting down her book and studying Maya's face with the keen perception that only mothers possess. "And you look like you've been through a storm." Maya managed a weak smile, touching her still damp hair. "I have, actually. It's raining pretty hard out there." But Dorothy's expression grew more serious as she took in her daughter's appearance more carefully. "That's not the only storm you've been through tonight, is it?" There was no point in trying to hide anything from her mother. Dorothy had raised Maya as a single parent, working multiple jobs and sacrificing her own dreams to ensure her daughter had every opportunity possible. They had developed the kind of bond that made deception impossible and unnecessary. Maya sank into the chair beside her mother's bed, the weight of the evening finally catching up with her. "I lost the job, Mama." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that both women understood immediately. Dorothy's face went pale, but she reached out and took Maya's hand in hers, her grip still strong despite everything the cancer treatments had put her through. "Tell me what happened," Dorothy said simply, her voice steady and supportive. Maya recounted the evening's events, from the spilled wine to her dismissal to the long walk in the rain. But when she got to the part about Alexander Hayes and his unexpected kindness, she found herself hesitating, unsure how to explain the strange encounter to her mother. "A man offered you a ride?" Dorothy's protective instincts kicked in immediately. "Maya, you didn't get in a car with a stranger, did you?" "I know how it sounds," Maya said quickly. "But, Mama, there was something different about him. He was kind, respectful. He just wanted to help. She pulled out Alexander's business card and handed it to her mother, who examined it carefully. Dorothy might not have had formal education beyond high school, but she had street smarts and an intuitive understanding of people that had served her well throughout her life. Alexander Hayes, Dorothy read aloud, her brow furrowing slightly. Why does that name sound familiar? Maya shrugged. I thought the same thing, but I can't place it. He said he might be able to help me find work through connections in the hospitality industry. Dorothy continued to study the card, turning it over in her hands as if it might reveal some hidden secret. This is expensive cardstock, she observed. And, look at the address. That's in the financial district, isn't it? You think he's wealthy? Maya asked, though she already knew the answer. Everything about Alexander, from his clothes to his car to his confidence, had screamed money and power. Wealthy enough to afford business cards that cost more than most people spend on groceries, Dorothy replied. The question is, what does a man like that want with helping a girl like you? It was a fair question, one that Maya had been wrestling with herself. In her experience, people with money and power rarely helped others without expecting something in return. But there had been something in Alexander's manner, something in the way he had looked at her, that suggested his motives were genuine. Maybe he's just a good person, Maya said, though she could hear the uncertainty in her own voice. Dorothy handed the card back to her daughter, her expression thoughtful. Maybe he is. But promise me you'll be careful, sweetheart. When you have nothing, it's easy to mistake opportunity for kindness. It was practical advice from a woman who had learned hard lessons about trusting the wrong people. But, as Maya looked at the card again, she found herself hoping that her mother's caution was unnecessary, that Alexander's offer of help was exactly what it appeared to be. They talked for another hour, discussing practical matters like how long their savings would last and which bills could be delayed without serious consequences. Dorothy had always been the practical one, the planner who found ways to make impossible budgets stretch just a little further. But even her resourcefulness had limits, and they both knew that Maya needed to find work quickly. We'll figure it out, Dorothy said as Maya prepared to let her mother get some rest. We always do. It was their family motto, born from years of facing challenges that seemed insurmountable. Maya kissed her mother's forehead and retreated to the living room, where she changed out of her damp uniform and settled onto the sofa with a cup of tea and Alexander's business card. The card felt heavier than it should have, weighted with possibilities both hopeful and uncertain. Maya found herself studying every detail, from the elegant font to the subtle texture of the paper. It was the kind of card that spoke of serious business, important decisions, and the kind of influence that could open doors or close them with equal ease. Sleep was elusive that night. Maya lay on the sofa, listening to the rain against the windows and the distant sounds of the city that never truly slept. Her mind kept returning to the moment when Alexander had looked at her across the rain-soaked street, the recognition she had seen in his eyes, and the genuine concern he had shown for her situation. There had been something almost familiar about the encounter, as if they were continuing a conversation that had been interrupted long ago. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, with the kind of persistent drizzle that made everything look washed out and tired. Maya woke early, her body clock still set to the hotel's demanding schedule, and found her mother already up and dressed, sitting at their small kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the morning newspaper. I've been thinking about your mysterious benefactor, Dorothy said without preamble. Alexander Hayes. I knew that name was familiar. She folded back a section of the newspaper and pointed to a small article in the business section. Maya leaned over her mother's shoulder to read, and her breath caught in her throat as she recognized Alexander's photograph accompanying the text. Hayes Industries announces expansion of hospitality division, the headline read. The article went on to describe how Alexander Hayes, CEO and primary shareholder of Hayes Industries, had just completed the acquisition of several major hotel chains, including the Grand Metropolitan where Maya had worked. Maya sank into the chair across from her mother, her mind reeling as she processed this information. Alexander Hayes wasn't just wealthy, he was the owner of the hotel that had fired her. He was the man whose employee policies had created the culture where a single complaint from an important guest could destroy a worker's livelihood without consideration for the circumstances. He owns the hotel, Maya whispered, more to herself than to her mother. He owns the place that fired me. Dorothy's expression grew concerned as she watched her daughter's face. That changes things, doesn't it? It changed everything. Maya's mind raced through the implications of this revelation. Alexander had been at the hotel on business, probably checking on his newly acquired property. He had witnessed her being escorted out by security, had seen her standing in the rain with nowhere to go, and had made the connection between her situation and his own company's policies. Why didn't he tell me? Maya asked, though she wasn't really expecting an answer. Why pretend to be just some stranger offering help? Maybe he was embarrassed, Dorothy suggested gently. Or maybe he wanted to help without making it about his business. Maya stood up and began pacing their small kitchen, her emotions churning between gratitude for Alexander's kindness and anger at his deception. She thought about their conversation in the car, how he had asked about her work and reacted when she told him about being fired. His tightened grip on the steering wheel made more sense now. He hadn't just been sympathizing with her situation, he had been confronting the reality of his own company's treatment of its employees. What am I supposed to do with this information? Maya asked, holding up the business card. Do I call him and pretend I don't know who he really is? Do I confront him about the fact that his company destroyed my life? Or do I just throw this away and pretend the whole thing never happened? Dorothy rose from her chair and pulled her daughter into a gentle embrace. You do what feels right in your heart, she said simply. But remember that sometimes the people who have the most power to change things are the ones who need to see the human cost of their decisions. The wisdom in her mother's words settled over Maya like a warm blanket. Dorothy had always had the ability to find clarity in complicated situations, to cut through emotions and politics to the essential truth of what mattered. Maya spent the morning applying for jobs online, sending her resume to hotels, restaurants, and cleaning services throughout the city. But even as she went through the motions of her job search, her mind kept returning to Alexander Hayes and the unexpected intersection of their lives. She found herself researching Hayes Industries, reading about its various business holdings and philanthropic activities. What she discovered was intriguing. Hayes Industries was involved in everything from real estate development to technology investments, but the company also had a reputation for progressive employment practices and community involvement. Alexander Hayes himself was known for his support of education initiatives and healthcare access programs. On paper, he seemed like exactly the kind of business leader who would care about the welfare of his employees. But Maya had seen firsthand how differently corporate policies could look from the ground level. She had been fired from one of his properties for a single accident, with no consideration for her work record or personal circumstances. The disconnect between the company's public image and her private experience was troubling and confusing. By afternoon, Maya had made a decision. She would call Alexander Hayes, not to beg for her job back or to ask for charity, but to tell him exactly what had happened and how his company's policies affected real people. She owed it to herself and to all the other workers who might face similar situations to speak up about the human cost of corporate decisions. Her hands shook slightly as she dialed the number on the business card. A professional-sounding receptionist answered and, after a brief hold, transferred her to what was apparently Alexander's direct line. Alexander Hayes, his familiar voice came through the phone, professional but warm. Mr. Hayes, Maya began, her voice steadier than she had expected. This is Maya Johnson. You gave me a ride home last night. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Maya could almost hear Alexander's surprise at receiving her call so soon. Maya, he said, and she could hear genuine pleasure in his voice. I'm glad you called. I hope you made it inside safely last night. I did, thank you, Maya replied. But I called because I learned something this morning that I think we need to discuss. I know who you are, Mr. Hayes. I know that you own the Grand Metropolitan Hotel. Another pause, longer this time. When Alexander spoke again, his voice was quieter, more careful. I see. And how do you feel about that? Maya had prepared for this moment, had planned what she wanted to say. But now, hearing his voice and remembering his kindness from the night before, she found herself struggling to maintain her composure. "I feel confused," she admitted. "I feel grateful for your help last night, but I also feel angry that your company fires people for single accidents without any consideration for their circumstances or work record." "You have every right to feel that way," Alexander said simply. "And you're right. We do need to discuss this, but not over the phone. Would you be willing to meet me for lunch today? I know a quiet place where we can talk privately." Maya hesitated. Meeting Alexander face to face seemed both more intimidating and more promising than continuing their conversation by phone. But her mother's words about confronting the people who had the power to change things echoed in her mind. "All right," she agreed. "But I want you to know that I'm not looking for charity or special treatment. I just want you to understand what your policies actually mean for the people who work for you." "I understand," Alexander replied, and Maya could hear what sounded like respect in his voice. "And I appreciate your honesty. There's a small cafe called Rosemary's on the Upper West Side. It's quiet, and the owner is discreet. Could you meet me there at 2 o'clock? Maya knew the place. It was in a neighborhood she rarely visited, the kind of area where people could afford to pay $15 for a salad and think nothing of it. But if Alexander was willing to meet her on neutral ground to discuss the situation honestly, she was willing to venture outside her comfort zone. "I'll be there," she confirmed, and ended the call before she could change her mind. The next few hours passed in a blur of nervous preparation. Maya changed clothes 3 times, settling finally on a simple black dress that she had worn to her high.